Morning everyone. I have the great pleasure of introducing our first speaker of the day. He has over 30 years experience as an aerospace engineer with extensive experience of first line management and small team projects with tight deadlines. This led to his interest in how he could be an effective first line manager, a role he thinks that's important to all businesses. As a motivational speaker, he's won several national awards, speech titles including the Toastmaster International Distinguished Speaker Award. He's also represented the UK and Ireland in the World Public Speaking Championships. So without any more words, I'd like to introduce Bob Ferguson, who's going to tell us how to talk to aliens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to How to Talk to Aliens, the simple key to effective communication between Earthlings. Communication, that skill that's so valuable in management, easy to say and yet much harder to deliver. It was George Bernard Shaw who said, "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has been achieved." Now I know most of us like to think we're pretty good with our communication, we get our message over, but the evidence doesn't actually support that. 2005, Vodafone carried out their Working Nation survey. It was a survey to find out about the happiness and motivation of people in the workplace. And they did this by asking managers a number of questions. And in a second I'm going to check your response against the survey. Because the question that interested me was, they said to managers, how many of you use positive praise to motivate your staff? And I'm going to ask you that question, and I want you to answer yes in one of two ways. If you already manage people, then if you use positive praise, put up your hand. If you don't, I haven't got there yet, if you don't manage people yet, but you think you would use positive praise to manage them, also put up your hand. So come on then, how many of you use positive praise to motivate your staff? Good. All right, that's pretty much 100%. So you've already done far better than Vodafone. In the Vodafone survey, 86% of managers said they used positive praise to motivate their staff. Sadly, it didn't tell us what the other 14% wanted to do. But 86% of them used positive praise. And that was a really good place to stop, because they'd asked the question, they got a good positive response, but of course they didn't. They then went and asked the employees of those managers how many of them received positive praise to motivate them. The answer, 32%. So well over half of the people who thought they were giving out positive praise weren't getting that message over. And you'd think that positive praise was a really simple thing to know whether you delivered or not. So we can see how confusing communication can be. I myself might even have been confused had I not been a new age man-ish. At least I grew up in the generation that started to provide really good facilities for women to combine family and career together. And in my own field, in the aerospace industry, there's been a huge increase in the number of women who work in our organisations. So it came as no surprise to me when my wife shoved a copy of this book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, into my hand and suggested I might like to read it. I didn't actually get through all of it. I only got through 3 or 4 chapters. But in those 3 or 4 chapters, I realised what a powerful analogy John Gray had picked. The concept that we came from different planets. Except there are far more than 2 planets. We are in fact almost each a unique planet. But there are still plenty of ways that we can look at us as groups to understand our behaviour and our communication. Now, the reason this analogy is so powerful is that if you think of people as aliens, I think it invokes two of the golden rules of communication. And to help us understand what those are, let's just consider that we're walking along the street and we see this really weird alien coming towards us. Now, if you're anyone but Paul, you probably look at that and think, I've never seen anything like that. And that's the first golden rule of communication. To think they're different to me. And that automatically invokes the second rule: how can I change my method of communication in order to get my message over? Because remember, it's our responsibility to get the message over. Now, if all aliens look like that, well then life would be simple, because it would be easy for us to recognise that they're different. But there's a whole spectrum of aliens. They start at one end with aliens like that that clearly look very different, and so automatically invoke those two rules. In the middle, we have people who come from different lands, different cultures, and because of the way they speak, we start to recognise that they're different and make some allowance for it. So, I don't know how many of you go abroad for your holidays. I quite often like to go over to France, but I still only possess schoolboy French. So when it comes time for holiday, I'll get out my schoolboy French, I brush up, I get out my useful phrases like je suis un pamplemousse, meaning I am a grapefruit, and other useful phrases I learnt. And when I get there, I breeze into the shop and come out with my well-learned phrases, and generally one of two things happens. Either the proprietor of the shop gives the famous Gallic shrug, this stupid English trying to speak French. But then they do one of a couple of things. Either they'll speak in French but very slowly to make sure that I can follow and understand, or what quite often happens is they want to improve their English, and so they'll practice their English with me. But both of those things happen because I move towards them and tried in their language. You go to France and speak English only, they will cut you dead. Don't understand. Then at the final end of the spectrum, you've got the people we see every day. We work with them, they look like us, they speak like us, and therefore we make the mistake of thinking they must be the same as us. And we don't bother to adjust our communication. But in fact, many of the people at this end can be just as big as alien as the people that we recognise at the far end of the spectrum. So what we need is a way to pick out what they're like and how to recognise them. Well, there are quite a lot of ways to recognise them, very popular ways. The Enneagram, Myers-Briggs type indicator is a very popular one in business, you'll see a lot. The DISC model. The one that I use is by two American doctors called Merrill and Reed, and they wrote a brilliant book. My own personal view is it should be mandatory reading for all managers. It's called Personal Styles and Effective Performance. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I like it. There's three, in fact. I'm going to give you one as we go through. But the first two are, number one, it's old. And as each year goes by, I learn to appreciate old things more and more. They started writing this book 50 years ago, but actually it's built on the work of Carl Jung, which was published in 1911, so it's just over 100 years old. Now, I personally think that business theories are a bit like prescription drugs. The ones that they show you now, which are the latest and greatest that you should use, but you don't see the side effects till 10 years down the line. With something that's been going on as long as this, and in fact most of the work, the DISC model and the Myers-Briggs were built on this original work, have stood the test of time. They're really useful. The second reason I like it is because there are 4 character types, and it seems that those are natural to us. They're built into us. I don't know why, I don't know whether that's nature or nurture, but I've done this with audiences down to 12 years old in schools. And when you talk about these characters, they recognise them. They know what sort of people they are. So it's a very natural way for us to communicate. Let's have a look and see what they are. A second. Right, Merrill and Reed split the world into 4. Driver, analytical, extrovert, and amiable. Now, before I carry on, let me just address 2 common concerns that we hear as soon as we go into anything that has a psychological base. Number 1, people think, are we being manipulative? Are we playing some tricks with people's minds to get our message over? Well, the answer is no. This is no more manipulative than me brushing up on my schoolboy French. All we're going to do is try and adjust our communication so it has a better chance of getting home. The second concern people often have is, are we being typecast? Are we being put in a little pigeonhole and this is the way we behave? And again, no. I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about these 4 character types as if they were individual people. But that's not true for most of us, as you'll see when we've done this exercise. We are generally a blend of all 4 characters. Not only are we a blend, but we are mobile within the blend of 4 characters, often according to what happens. So there's 2 reasons we can move out of our norm. Number 1 is we can do it deliberately if we want to develop. If we recognise that the skills we've got are not the skills that match the job that we want to do, we can go and build those skills deliberately to alter our graph. But the other thing that happens is they change accidentally. You will find people change according to the situation they're in. So if the situation changes, they will change their communication, because all communication is a balance between 3 things: between us, the people who are listening, and the situation we're in. So you never learn how to speak to somebody, you only learn how to speak to them in a certain situation, and you will find in other situations that style will change. You may see it at work. If you go round and someone's leaving work and they're packing up and they're shutting their briefcase, watch what happens. People recognise that they've only got a very short time that they're going to hold their attention. So they'll speed up their communication, get out the bullet points. I just need to tell you this. Only the important information comes out. If you don't believe me, you can try it for yourself. When you're at home, if the phone rings, irrespective of what you're doing, say, I'm just in the middle of eating. And listen what happens at the other end. This is, by the way, this is a great trick if you don't want to be disturbed at night. People speed up immediately. They come out with the key phrases that they want you to hear. They'll say, oh right, all I wanted to say was, can I see you on Friday, 9:30, whatever it is, I'll speak to you later. And they put the phone down. Absolutely great. So what we do is modified by the situation. So let's have a look at these 4 types. And I think intrinsically you will know them. The drivers are always the ambitious ones. They're the push on people, they get things done. They're likely to be towards the top of their organisation. All of you who are in management are likely to have a healthy chunk of driver within you. They can be seen as pushy by other people, but it's just because they're very task focused. And all of these groups have a key word. And the key word for drivers is control. They just love to be in control. Take the control away from them and they are not happy bunnies. Over in the top left, the analyticals. Well, analyticals love one thing only. Lots and lots of lovely data. You cannot give an analytical enough data. If you've got an analytical working for you and they've said, well, I could make a decision, but I just need this piece of information, do not bother to go and get it. Because by the time you're back, they'll have thought of something else that they need to make the decision. They just cannot get it. Their key word is thinking. And they're a bit like the swans of life. Often when you talk to analyticals, they can come across as a little bit slow when they respond. But actually they're not slow. Underneath, the brain is going 10 to the dozen. And there isn't much left to drive the mouth. It's a sort of Sort of old joke you get when people say, if you say good day to an engineer, they're thinking, what do they mean? Do they mean it's above average relative humidity? Is there more sunshine than normal for this time of year? And what they're looking for all the time are the bits of information that you didn't give them. So they're the thinkers in the group. Down in the bottom right, the extroverts. The extroverts love to be in the limelight. Extroverts love nothing better than an audience. I don't know where you'd find one of those in here. They're very emotive people, and they're the gut feel, so their key word is intuition. They make very good sports supporters. Anything with a bit of emotion where they can go and watch, they get involved straight away and wound up. They like to be at the centre of attention. You'll find them in perhaps training or sales where they're very much in the limelight. But beware of ostracising them. Don't let them slide out of the conversation, because you'll get a syndrome called ostentatious withdrawal, where they slam down their pen and walk out. They don't go quietly, so make sure you keep them involved. The last group, probably the most misunderstood group of the lot, the amiables down in the bottom left. I say their name's misleading because people always think they're nice and kind and wishy-washy, and often when they come into a project they don't have the direct skills that the project need, but they are like the oil in an engine. As the name amiable suggests, they do not like conflict, but they're very good at removing it in a non-threatening way. So what they'll do is they'll go to one side and say, I understand you don't agree with them, that seems fair enough. I thought this point was pretty fair, what do you think to that? And they'll get this side to move a bit this way. And then they'll go over this side and say, I've just been talking to them and actually they agree with quite a lot of what you're doing, but the point they made is quite fair, what do you think? And they'll drag you a bit this way. And gradually they'll take the conflict out of the group. Absolutely brilliant. The other thing they're very good at is relationship building. That's their key word, relationships. They love to build relationships, and if you've got them in your team, they will often build strong relationships outside the group, and that can be very valuable later. 9 times out of 10, if you say, oh, we need to get this done, we need somebody who can do all the graphic design for this, you'll find it's the amiable says, oh yeah, I know someone in graphic design, I'll go and have a word with them. Because they're building relationships for you outside of the group. Very powerful, but they never appear strong. So there we've got the 4 character types, and you've got handouts. Could I just check that everyone's got a handout with the grid on it? Has anyone not got? There's a gentleman at the back, Steve. You want to take that? Anyone else, if you want to put up your hand, and Steve will drop you. I'll just tell you a bit about the axes while he's delivering those out. The original work by Merrill and Reed had 2 axes, one vertical, one horizontal, and a dimension that you can't see called variability. Mine, you'll see, has 7 axes. And that's not because mine is any better than theirs, but the third benefit of the work of Merrill and Reed is it's observational. It's not one of the standard inventory types, even though you're going to go through an inventory type exercise here. It's designed to be observational. Because if you're going out speaking to people, it's really inconvenient if in the middle you say, would you just mind filling in this 7-page questionnaire so I can get a good idea how you want your communication? The axes that I put in are so that you can recognise people that you work with and start to understand where they come from. Now you've got all 7 axes on there in one hit. I'm going to go through them one at a time. I'm going to put my mark up on there. I'd like you to put your mark on there, and I'll explain what we do as we go along. But remember, the axes are there as characteristics that we should be able to spot in people in the workplace. First axis at the top, persuasive. High persuaders on the right, low persuaders on the left. This is not about ability. We all have the ability to be persuasive if the need arises. People on the right want you to see the world their way. They will go out of their way to persuade you that they're right and their vision is correct. The people on the left They're very strongly centred on their own opinion. So actually they don't much care what you believe. They're the sort of people that if you say something to them, oh no, I think the contrary, they'll just shrug their shoulders. It could be French, in fact, couldn't they? They just shrug their shoulders and say, well, if that's what you want to believe, get on with it. So if you think your beliefs are very strongly self-centred, you're not worried about persuading the rest of the world, put your dot towards the left. If on the other hand you're one of those who likes everyone to buy into your vision and persuade them, put your dot towards the right. And there's mine on there now. The next axis down, assertiveness. And I'm not talking about aggression, I'm talking about true assertiveness, the ability to make and defend your own needs, but consider the needs of the other people. Aggression is when you don't consider the needs of the other people. You see people in management who are really good at this. They want things done, they explain why they want it done, they understand your needs, they'll find a way to work around it, but they're still going to try and achieve their task. The people on the left are the low assertiveness ones. They're the ones I've typically seen in a meeting. You'll see them in a meeting and they haven't contributed for the entire meeting. And they'll get up at the end and they'll walk out and you hear them going down the corridor saying, oh, that was a complete waste of time. Why on earth was I invited to them? But it will never occur to them to stand up and say, sorry, this meeting is completely wasting my time. I'm going back to my desk. If you need me, give me a ring. They'll sit there and suffer. So they let their rights become eroded. If you think that perhaps there are times when you allow your rights to be eroded, put your dot towards the left. If you think you're good at standing up and defending your rights but considering other people, put your dot towards the right. And there's mine in there. The third axis, attention span. People on the right have the attention span of a gnat. They cannot concentrate for more than 2 minutes. They got one job, they know what's coming next, they're half thinking of that, they want to deal with this, they want to move on to the next job, they haven't got time to sit about. These are always the fast-paced people down the right. People on the left are those that are very comfortable reading a report for 2 days. You give them a report, you say, could you go through that? You go back 2 days later and you say, how have you done? They say, well, I've done a pretty fair job, but if you just give me another day, I'll be through with it. Very comfortable with long attention spans, sitting, devoting themselves to one task. So if you think you're fast, you like to jump from task to task, put your dot towards the right. If you think that you consider stuff and you want far longer to read it thoroughly, put your dot towards the left. And the final one on here, decision making. People on the right like to make fast decisions. The people at the top, the drivers, like to make fast decisions based on fact. People at the bottom, the intuition people, just like to make the decision quickly. They like it just to feel right. As long as it feels right, they'll deal with everything else later. The people on the left are very slow decision makers. The analyticals at the top, of course, because they need all the data before they'll make a decision. The amiables at the bottom because they're very fair people. They like to see both sides, so they'll vacillate between which side they come down on a decision. If you ever get a decision from an amiable, get it in writing. Do not go away without their decision in writing, because as soon as someone else comes up to them, they'll change their mind. They'll see their viewpoint and change again. But they take time because they can't make up their mind. So if you feel you make your decisions slowly, put your dot towards the left. If you're a quick decision maker, put your dot towards the right. Now you've got 4 dots on there on the horizontal axis. What I'd like you to do is draw a vertical line through the rightmost dot, and there's mine, and a vertical line through the leftmost dot. Okay, if you just do that. I really love this part. This is where you see the analyticals. They're the people who are reaching for straight edges to get their line straight. Right, there's the horizontal axis. We'll move on to the vertical axes now. The right one, attention to detail. Sorry, the left one, attention to detail. The people at the top want all the I's dotted, the T's crossed. They want to make sure everything's in place, that you've thought of everything before you move on to the next stage. The people at the bottom are big people, generalist type people. Yeah, that looks about right. We'll pick up the detail later. So if you're a person who likes the detail right before you start, put your dot towards the top. If you're more inclined to look at the big picture and say, yeah, let's go with it, we can sort it out later, put your dot towards the bottom. The middle axis is emotion, low at the top, high at the bottom. The people at the top are very fact focused. They're the sort of people who say, well, don't worry about feelings, this is what the facts indicate, this is what we'll have to do. Very task and fact orientated. The people at the bottom are emotional, they want it to feel right. No, I know the facts support this, but it just doesn't feel right. If you allow emotion to get involved in your decision making, then put your dot towards the bottom. If you're someone who focuses very hard on the fact, put your dot towards the top. Ah, there's mine. Oh dear. And the last one, organisation. People at the top, really well organised. They like to have everything in its place. You'll know if you go in their office, it's all got all the lever arch files, they're all labelled, they've got an index system, they can know just where to put their hand on any piece of paper. It is so frustrating. The people at the bottom are very happy working in chaos. They'll have piles of data or piles of information on their desk. As long as they know where it is, that's all that matters. You know, if you ask them for a piece of paper, they'll dive into the middle of a pile somewhere and say, oh, there it is. I knew just where it was. And I know some of you will have difficulty. You'll say, Bob, if I go into someone's office and it's neat and tidy, how do I know if that's a person who's organised or it's a person who's disorganised who's just had a good tidy up? And the answer is simple. Look for something on their desk like pencils and move it and watch what happens. The people at the top will not be able to tolerate that. They'll move it back to its prescribed position. People at the bottom won't worry too much. So now you've got 3 dots on the vertical axes, and what I'd like you to do is put a line through the topmost one. Let's put in the topmost one, and a line through the bottommost one. And when you've done that, you should have formed some form of rectangle. And just to show you more clearly on there, I've hatched mine in. If you haven't got a rectangle, this whole process is in the notes. You can go back and do it a bit slower. What you will see on there straight away is your sort of personality, and you will see probably the characteristics that are desirable from the job you're doing. And you'll be able to tell whether that's a good match. Now, it is one of the problems that engineers sometimes have when they migrate from engineering into management. Because you know what we do with engineers? They come along and they show some technical ability when they're young. And there's my little alien. He's just in the analytical section. He's got some technical ability, or she's got some technical ability. So we take that up and we send them to university. And there we polish those analytical skills. We show them more analysis techniques, how to work things out rationally, and all the rest of the stuff that go with engineering degrees. Then we send them out into the workplace. And we get them to use those skills on a regular basis. How to become really effective as an analytical. And then we say, you're so good at that, we'll make you a manager. And that's what we do if we're not careful. We move them into an area where their skills have not been developed, that requires almost a completely different skill set. And that's what there was an article many years ago in Professional Engineering, the IMechE magazine, that said engineers were 4 times more likely to get to a board position than any other discipline. But when they got there, they were 4 times more likely to fail. And the largest single factor for the failure was that they hadn't built the management skills en route. They become very good at managing purely just analyticals as they grew up. And then when it came to general management, they found it weak. So now you've got a box there, and what does that tell us? Well, firstly, if you've got a large box like that, it's overlapping several different characters which could mean several things. It may in fact mean that you could be several different people at different times. I know one big engineering company, they had an accelerated development program, but they found that some of the people, when they went on this accelerated development program, they moved away from their work colleagues. They became aloof. In fact, one person was so bad, all his work colleagues thought he was a complete jerk. And they thought, well, we've got to put this right before he gets to the top of the pile. So they called in a management coach to look at him, and he looked at this sort of thing, and he came up with a theory. He said, I know this chap has a wife and a baby at home, a happy family man, so I wonder if he could actually have two characters, the one he shows at work and the one he shows at home. So he rang his wife, and he put a theory to her, and she agreed. She said, when he's at home, he's a complete jerk as well. Now, do you remember at the beginning I said that because we're a blend of types, that we can move fluidly about and we can change according to different circumstances? If the rectangle you've drawn looks like that, you ain't going anywhere. Those are the people who are consistent. If you've got a small rectangle in one corner, then you are likely always to behave in a consistent fashion. They are the people who tend to work at home in a similar fashion to the way they work at work. Is that the aliens calling? Yes, so if you've got a small rectangle like that, you're going to find it much harder to migrate to something different. Back to the big rectangle, one of the advantages of being fluid in the big rectangle is you can become what I like to call a communication chameleon, which means that you can move from type to type almost effortlessly. Now, I did this with a small electronics company. I did all the staff and I got them to draw their graph. I did the boss as well, and then I asked the staff to draw on their graph where they thought the boss's rectangle was. Most of them had a good smattering of the truth in there, but interestingly, virtually every person moved the boss's rectangle far closer to theirs than it was in reality. He was a communication chameleon. He had learned that when he went to talk to different members of staff, they needed their communication in a different way. And he adjusted accordingly, so they all thought, well, he's a bit like me. And that's really what builds a little bit of rapport as well, if people sense that you're very much like them, very much in the same mould. We need all types, of course. The big problem comes when they try to communicate. I'm going to give you one example, the driver and the analytical, because that's very common in engineering. Typically, say, an analytical would go in to see the driver. They would take in with them their 3 lever arch files of evidence. They'd say, boss, we've got a small problem, and if you just give me 3 hours of your undivided attention, we can go through and sort it out. At which point, the driver, as they're likely to be, is sliding down and rolling their eyes and thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this? Communication mismatch. And yet it is quite possible for them to take the information in such a way that they get a good communication going. All they have to do is take with them an executive summary, something that the boss can look at and say, all right, I see what the problem are, I see what the issues are, and then a map of where all the information is in their 3 lever arch files. Because there are other axes on this grid that you can add, you will be able to observe, you can build your own, but 2 of them are risk taking. The people on the right are very strong risk takers, the people on the left are risk averse. And the other one is the people on the right are top down, the people on the left are bottom up. So analyticals naturally want to build their evidence from the bottom up. Drivers do not want to hear that. They want to see it from the top down, so they want the executive summary. Let me have a look at the executive summary. Do what I'm good at. They go through it and they say, that's all right, hang on, that's a risk. Where's the information for that? It's in the map. All right, I see it. Okay, right, we can control that risk. And then they move on and then they'll make their decision quickly. So it's about understanding. The reverse is also true. If the driver goes to an analytical, often what they'll want is a decision. Analyticals do not like to make quick decisions. And generally what they do, if they're forced, is they'll make the decision, but they'll carry on thinking about it. And they feel completely justified coming up to you 2 days later and saying, boss, remember that decision I gave you 2 days ago? Well, that was wrong. And that's your fault, by the way, because you didn't give me enough time. I've been thinking about it since, and this is the right answer. So if, as a driver type, you want to get your decisions out of the analytical, then what you have to do is go and say, look, we need a decision by this afternoon. I know that won't give you enough time to do the job thoroughly. What I'd like you to do is go through it this afternoon, give me your best decision at the time, give me the assumptions that you've made, and list all the risks that you think we're taking. Now that works to the driver's strength because they're now going to get a list of risks. It works to the analytical strength because they're now going to be able to set aside some of the concerns they would have by putting them in the risk column. And all this really comes down to education, understanding how other people in your organisation work, what they want, and how you can adjust your communication in order to get your message home. So now what you've got is a chart on there that reveals something about you. Or have you? No, of course you haven't. All you've got there is a chart showing what you think of yourself. Remember I said that this is an observational technique, and whether we like it or not, we are what we appear to other people. So it doesn't matter what's in your head, whether you think you're being a really kind, benign boss. If your staff don't see it like that, that's not what you are to them. And in fact, one of the interesting exercises you can do is to get your partner to do this chart as they think you are. Now, could I just say at this stage, I neither recommend this nor take any responsibility for the consequences. But at one stage when I had to do a Myers-Briggs type indicator, that's what I did. I gave it to my wife, I asked her to fill it in as she thought I would answer, and one of the axes was completely flipped. Not just on a tipping point where I'd scored 11-10 and she'd scored 10-11. She had it 22-1 one way and I had it 22-1 the other way. She just saw me as completely different. And that's the point with this technique. It's observational. You can build it, but be aware that you should get feedback from other people if you really want to be effective. So let me just remind you of the key aspects of this, that all our communication is a balance between us, the listener, and the situation we're in. And if the situation changes, you may have to change your communication style. But it all leads us to using the 2 golden rules of communication. Looking at people and recognising they're different, and then thinking, how can I change my communication to get my message over? And of course the whole thing all starts when you learn how to speak to aliens. Thank you very much. I've been asked if we can allow 5 minutes here for any questions that you've got. Do we need the microphone, Steve? No? Has anyone got any questions? Lady? Yes, did I give you a key word for amiables? The key word is relationships. Yeah, they're very strong relationship people. Any other questions? Oh, come on, you're just all relieved to get out 5 minutes earlier. Sorry, I'll come to you in a second.
You talked about personalities and fluidity. Can people change over time depending on circumstances?
Yeah. Yeah, really good question. Gentleman asked, when I said about the fluidity, do people change over time? I've certainly noticed that I've changed. One of the things that I've noticed is that people who are naturally to the left of the grid, so who are risk averse, actually become less risk averse as they get older. They start to take more risks. They're less worried about the consequences. So that can be a natural process of aging. Also, the gentleman asked about our workplace. Yes, we can be conditioned by our workplace. Yes, we can change because we can pick up new skills, and that will shift us about in the graph. What it will generally do is bring out an aspect of us that was always there, but is generally underused. If it's a completely different aspect that's not really a part of our natural build-up, then it's most likely that under high stress we will revert to type. So it's not a skill you should rely on in high stress. Okay. Lady, okay. All right, the book by Marilyn Reed is Personal Styles and Effective Performance, and I think in your notes I have put the ISBN in there. It is really good. You can buy it in this country. I think they're about £15. However, I'm a complete cheapskate. I buy most of mine from America, where you seem to be able to pick them up from a penny as ex-library books, apart from the £2.80 post and packaging. So, and they're all in really good condition. They're all well looked after. Any other questions?
Is this your main job then?
No. I'm still very much in engineering. I'm an aerospace engineer. I work on contract. I work for Astrum in the space industry, and I work for Airbus via their tiered suppliers. But this has been an increasing part of my life, only because I started it off because it was something that I was interested in, but I find a lot of people, particularly in engineering and accountancy, strangely, which is another strong analytical base, become really interested in how it affects people in the workplace and what it can do for their communication. I had a lady in here, and I could see in her face, it was like a light bulb went on when I talked about this, and she came up to me in the tea break afterwards and she said, "Do you know, I had a person at work and I thought he was being deliberately obstructive, and I was actually considering getting rid of him." And she said, "I now understand what he was doing." So right across the board I think it has implications. And
I just suppose, so if you and your wife are at dinner party, do they all stand up thinking he's going to be handed?
No. When you say do you analyse people, I never analyse, but I observe people because, let me just give you in conversation one of the very quick things you can pick up. Pace is a really good indicator. Listen to people's language. The people down the right always want to talk fast, naturally, because they tend to be visually based. So they've got a picture in their head, and a picture paints 1,000 words, so they're trying to get the 1,000 words out to match the picture they've got in their head. So they've got everything quick. You'll find that the people on the left are naturally slower speakers. So if you have a dinner party or you have any sort of gathering, you'll hear the analyticals, the left and the right people, very quickly. And if you talk in a language or a speed that's very different to them, it will put them off. So if you go up to an analytical who's more used to talking at this pace and thinking, because remember, for analyticals, speaking slowly is not a waste of time. They are thinking all the time, so that's not a waste of time if they talk slowly. So if you've got someone who speaks at this speed, and then you go up to them and say, "Oh, I'd like you to do this," and I do that, and hang on, I can't get all that into my head straight away. They can't take it in fast. So if you want to go and give information to an analytical and your driver, you're pushed over to the right-hand side, then you need to slow down your communication a bit and give them time to think between the blocks you give them. And then they can take it in, rearrange it in their own head, and they've got it sorted. So I don't analyse people, but it's very easy to observe what they're up to and pick out a way to communicate with them that suits them. We're at 9:45 now. Are there any other questions? One more, last one. Yep.
Talk about left and right.
Yep.
Does it work up and down on this?
In what way, sorry?
To get a extra much.
What things that you can spot?
Where you're talking about this, you get people on the right hand side and left hand side.
Yeah.
Or does it work across analytical drivers?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The people who are in the next to one another will also annoy one another. So left to right analytical drivers, they speak at different speeds. Sorry, the gentleman was asking whether this works up and down as well as left and right. And it is, but you have to look harder. Pace is a very easy thing to pick out in people's conversations. But if you look top to bottom, you'll see differences as well. For instance, the people at the top will tend to be less emotional and less enthusiastic. The people at the bottom will be bubbling over with enthusiasm. You can pick out the left and the right. Let me give you another one. The people at the bottom always look for good eye contact. You'll see them if they're walking down the corridor. They're trying to get eye contact with the people as they walk down and say hello, and because they're building relationships all the time. They're looking to make contact. People at the top, generally less good eye contact. They won't seek the eye contact necessarily. So it does work both ways of the grid. Now, we're just over 9:45, so I've got to move on. Is there anything else we have to do? I will be around at the tea break, so if any of you still have questions, I'll be very happy to answer them then. Thanks very much.